I'm Sherry Lovett. I'm a member of the Asheville Storytelling Circle, and it is an honor to be invited to do this today, so thank you for having us. Vixie is also one of the Asheville Storyteller Circle members. So, how's everybody doing tonight?
Pretty good.
Y'all work hard, right? Yeah. Well, I have a story about a lady who worked really hard. We leave our homes in the morning. We kiss our children goodbye. While we slave for the bosses, our children scream and cry. And when we draw our money, our grocery bills to pay, not a cent to spend for clothing, not a cent to lay away. And on that very evening, our little son will say, I need some shoes, Mother, and so does Sister May. Oh, it grieves the heart of a mother, you everyone must know. But we can't buy for our children, our wages are too low. That's the beginning of a ballad titled Mill Mother's Lament, written by Ella Mae Wiggins, a strong, determined woman with a mind of her own. Ella Mae was born in September of 1900 in the Appalachian Mountains to a poor family. She spent her childhood moving from one logging camp to another. Her mother died when she was 18, and her father died a year later. It was around that time that Ella Mae met and married a young man named John Wiggins, and in less than a year, they had their first child. Now, John Wiggins thought they ought to move to a mill town so that they could get a mill job and have a regular income. So that took them to Cowpen, South Carolina, and Ella Mae's work in the textile mills began. Well, they moved from one mill town to another until in 1926, they landed in Gaston County, North Carolina. John Wiggins deserted Ella Mae and their children, and that left Ella Mae to tend to her children all by herself. But Ella Mae was a strong, determined woman with a mind of her own. She got a job with the Luray American Mill No. 2. She worked 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, and she made $9 a week. Now, in the 1920s, segregation was the law of the land, but as I've said, Ella Mae had a mind of her own, and she didn't believe in segregation. So she rented a little shack outside Bessemer City in an African-American neighborhood known as Stumptown. And her neighbors helped watch her children while she worked. Mill work was hard work. Long hours, noisy, tedious, dirty work. But it was beginning to get harder, because the world was changing. There was a lot more competition for the textile mills, and our country was galloping toward the stock market crash and the Great Depression. So the mill owners, mostly Northerners who came to the South to take advantage of the large population of poor Southerners desperate for work, they wanted to increase productivity. So they decided to employ new scientific management practices. This meant that they were requiring their workers to work longer hours and harder for the same money, sometimes less money. Yeah, the mill owners called it new scientific management practices, but the workers called it the stretch out. Now, in the 1920s, unions and communism were closely linked. And in North Carolina, sentiments ran high against both. But with mill conditions getting to be so bad, the National Textile Workers Union thought the time was ripe to gain a foothold in the South. So they sent Fred Beal, a union organizer, to to search for a mill where conditions were so bad that the people would be ready for a union. He found one, the Luray American Mill No. 2. The people there were ready for a union, including Ella Mae. Ella Mae was a strong, determined woman with a mind of her own, and she embraced the union. She learned organizational and strike tactics. She took on segregation and said all people needed to stand together if the union was going to be successful. She became the union bookkeeper. She went to Washington, D.C. and testified about the labor practices in the South. Whether she was testifying in D.C. or speaking at one of the regular meetings, Ella Mae shared her personal story, and it had a powerful impact. I'm the mother of 9 children. They all got the whooping cough at the same time. I was working nights. I asked the super if he'd put me on days so as I could tend them during the bad spells. But he wouldn't. I don't know why. So I had to quit. And then there weren't no money for medicine, and 4 of my children died. Now, I never made no more than $9 a week. You can't tend for a family on money such as that. That's why I stand for the union. That's why we've all got to stand for the union, so as we can do better for our children and they won't have lives like we got. And Ella Mae would sing. She was the union balladeer. Fred Beal, the union organizer, remembered, no evening would pass without a song from our Ella Mae, the minstrel of our strike. She'd be standing in a corner, chewing tobacco or snuff, going over a new poem she'd scribbled on the back of a union leaflet. Someone would call out for Ella Mae to sing, and other voices would take up the suggestion. And Ella Mae would step forward, begin to sing in her deep, resonant voice, a simple ballad. Other voices would join in, and the ballad would drift into old spirituals and hymns, and many a praise the Lord would resound through the quiet night. Ella Mae sang with an unmodulated vibrancy that touched the emotions of her listeners. Her words had the power of the truth, and she sang them to the tune of old Appalachian songs. And when she sang, it grieves the heart of a mother you everyone must know, everyone did know. When she sang, let's stand together and have a union here, the crowd thrilled to the militancy in her voice. Ella Mae's songs went from mill to mill to mill, carrying better than any speech or leaflet the message about how the union could help the people have a better life. In the spring of 1929, when the union started to get going, 5 people were fired. The union voted to strike. 1,800 people left their jobs. But after a month, most of those folks were so broke and desperate they went back to their mill jobs. But 100 or so, including Ella Mae, were determined to stay the course. Even after they were kicked out of their mill housing and had to live in a tent village set up by the union, they wouldn't give up. And tension in Gaston County began to mount. One day in the summer of that year, Chief Adderholt, the police chief of Gastonia, and some local men that had been deputized, went to break up a peaceful picket line made up of mostly women and children. They were not kind. Then they went to the tent village. Confusion broke out, shots were fired, and Chief Adderholt was killed. Everybody that was around there was rounded up, taken in. 16 of the strikers were charged with the death of Chief Adderholt, but they were later released when a mistrial was called, and tension in Gaston County continued to mount. Now, Ella Mae was seen as a particular threat because of her association with the National Textile Workers Union and her stance on segregation.